The monitor screamed a red alert and a recorded voice said due to Mara Ellison, loud enough to rattle the tent poles. Suspicion tightened Mara's jaw the way cold did at the thumb, a small, focused irritation that governed her next moves. She slapped the playback key and the speaker repeated the name with the same cadence her team used during morning roll call. Raymond, check channels 1 through 4. Mara ordered. Leela mapped the timestamps. She moved while she spoke. She did not wait for answers. Mara kept her hands on the recorder and her feet on the ground. She had spent a decade chasing anomalous acoustic signatures. Wind that carried syllables, glitches in animal calls, the stray human voice on a weather band. That experience taught her to treat any signal like evidence and every immediate decision like a chain of custody problem. The loudspeaker offered a concrete, urgent problem, voices coming from within a sector labeled uninhabited. In every map she carried, the conflict was simple and sharp. Follow containment orders or pursue a probable breach. She chose pursuit. Suspicion pushed her forward. Raymond moved to Mara's left with a laptop and a thermos that had duct tape around its lid. Spectrogram shows human formants at 3000 Hz. Raymond, tapping the screen, source vector points 12 degrees east. It's inside quadrant 7. His sentences were short, clinical. He numbers like a surgeon saying which artery. Mara leaned over the screen. Play the raw clip. She watched as the waveform showed a layered signature. A clear fundamental and an overlay of background noise that matched no recorded animal. The playback speaker offered a voice speaking a name, and beneath it a second voice mimicking the same name at a lower pitch. Leela, did you place any test mics in quadrant 7? Leela Park shook her head. No, we've had nothing beyond the station perimeter for weeks. Mara felt suspicion slide toward doubt. If no one had placed microphones, then the recording suggested either someone had trespassed or the environment itself had begun producing speech. She ordered the field retrieval team assembled and watched the sun lose shape behind the pines. The uninhabited tag on the maps made the choice to go in heavier. Containment would prefer they quit and quarantine the data. Mara wanted answers. Commander Hayes stepped into the tent wearing the regulation jacket, a dozen institutional patches bright against olive. Command wants withdrawal and a sealed handover. Hayes. He set a paper folder on the table, the top page stamped with a heavy black bar. Containment protocol requires we do not engage unknown sources in restricted sectors. Mara opened her mouth and closed it. She could hear the names in the speakers again, as if the thing listened while they argued. We trace the source first, Commander, she said. If we can isolate it, we can prevent more exposure. No? We quarantine. Leave the field units to perimeter maintenance. Hayes folded the folder and looked at Raymond. Raymond, secure the tapes. An argument started short and sharp. Commander, that's not our procedure if it's an active human signal. Mara, you are not authorized to advance the perimeter without clearance. Hayes replied. I am not authorized to leave an active signal untraced. Mara. Her voice tightened. She did not raise it. The tent tasted of instant coffee and pending redaction. Raymond looked between them. Raymond, Commander, the spectrogram is clean. If Mara goes in with a 2-person team, she can check the nearest flag sensor and report back in 1 hour. His tone carried arithmetic and risk together. Commander Hayes set his jaw. There were 3 rapid lines of negotiation and then a concession, 1 retrieval. No chase beyond the nearest flagged sensor. You take 2. You report directly to me. Mara prepared gear with motion so practice they required only muscle memory. She checked the worn olive parka for the institutional patch, clipped the rugged guppies to the strap and tightened the headlamp with taped housing. The recorder hung from her belt with a white label that read, Chainer. Leela packed the extra batteries. Raymond adjusted the piece waypoints. They hiked at dawn, the forest floor throwing short wet smells against their faces. The boundary markers had been hammered into saplings months ago. Past the last marked tree, the ground sloped into a shallow hollow. They had clear orders: approach, retrieve, record, return. Mara kept the suspicion close to her ribs, a steady pulse that made her check the trees instead of looking up. Twice she paused and tilted her head to listen to recorded playback through the small in-ear monitor. Each time the same layered call echo code from the speakers, and each time it implied voices existed where no human presence was logged. At the nearest flagged sensor, the tripod listed on one leg. The digital recorder hung from its housing like an eye with lichen at its edges. Condensation had pooled where the casing met the mount. Damp drops threaded the recorder surface. No footprints led away from the clearing through the dew-laced grass. Mara crouched and brushed moss aside with a gloved finger. She did not verbalize what she felt, she cataloged it. Lila handed her a handheld playback device. On-site recording is clean until 3:03 am. Lila, then this clip starts. She set the device against the tripod and hit play. The speakers emitted a voice layered in 2 registers. The higher register said Leela Park, in Leela's exact pitch. The lower register said Leela come home, with a delay that made the words echo against invisible trunks. Mara listened and then rewound the clip. The timestamp on the recorder read 2 hours earlier. She checked the device's clock. It matched station time. The clip timestamp predates our arrival by 3 hours. Mara, whoever made this couldn't be me or you at that hour. Raymond ran a wavelet pass on the file and said, there are residues of human breath in the waveform. The mouth movement artifacts are present. Whoever produced this used human lungs. Leela swallowed. It sounds like me. It sounds like my voice. Mara felt emotion shift. Suspicion pooled into a cold fear that made her fingers clamp the recorder tighter. She tested the playback through the field mic and heard, beneath the mimicry, an extra low tone that matched no recorded instrument. She recorded it again as evidence. They carried the recorder back toward the command clearing. Mara had intended to stop at the next waypoint and report. Instead, her feet took another path, one Mara did not brief on the maps in her head. The desire to trace the mimic swelled from suspicion into a practical drive. She wanted data to deliver to Hayes, not an anecdote. She wanted to preserve the chain of custody and the meaning of the sounds. Halfway between the clearing and the station, Mara heard her name spoken from behind a stand of young pines. The voice was measured and near, like a radio held a foot from the ear. She spun. The undergrowth showed only broken ferns and scuffed needles. Her radio choked on static. Mara. Leela called over the channel. Mara, you there? Silence opened and closed. Mara answered without hesitation. I'm here. Her mouth was dry. She stepped into the trees and called. Raymond. Leela, stay at the clearing. I'm going 100 meters. Mara, you don't. Raymond began. I heard it. Mara. Her voice went small and precise. Doubt moved through her like an assessment. Was this tactical foolishness or necessary science? She moved deeper. The radio hissed and cut. The path narrowed. Her headlamp pointed a hard white cone and her breath fogged between the trees. A pale movement registered at the edge of her vision. Not a person, not quite an animal. It was a whitened shape that held itself between trunks, the fog clinging to it. Mara called the name again in a clipped tone. The sound that returned matched neither Leela nor herself perfectly. It held both cadences at once and then blended into small, quick steps away. She followed. The forest thickened and her piece lost solid signal where the canopy closed. She moved by sound and the muscle memory of the trail. The deeper she walked, the more the mimicry unfolded. Fragments of their laughter, clipped phrases from earlier briefings, and then the voice saying, follow me. The line between true human speech and imitation thinned until she could not separate them by ear alone. From the clearing came a sudden burst, radio chatter collapsing into static, a single line of panic. Mara! Lila's voice on the radio was raw. Mara, where are you? Then nothing but an analog whine. Mara jammed the radio against her mouth and yelled, Lila, stay where you are! The reply was immediate in tone but wrong in source. From two directions the voice said, Mara, come here, in a register identical to Lila and to Mara, layered and overlapping. Mara stopped. Her hands went to the recorder and the gaps like a pilot checking instruments. The pressure around her ribs felt like a tightening strap. Her fear changed. It became mechanized, tactical. She catalogued physical data points, the sound, the loss of radio, the pale movement. She recorded and marked each. Then Lila vanished from the clearing. Raymond made it back to the perimeter alone. When he arrived, he was carrying a mangled radio and a recorder with a cracked case. His eyes were bright and fixed. He did not speak in full sentences for a moment. He set the equipment on the table and let Mara see the screens. The playback from the broken radio overlapped names until they formed a chorus. Mara, Lila, Raymond, each name pressed into the other. Mara went to the table, took the recorder and rewound to the last intact hour. The data showed a sequence of events. A recorded plea that matched Lila's voice at 3:03 a.m. Later, edits that placed the same plea at earlier times. Then a waveform gap the size of an entire transmission. The artifact suggested someone or something could copy voices, rearrange timestamps, and insert those sounds at distant sensors. Mara felt an emotion shift again from clinical fear to a brittle anger designed to protect the team and the evidence. She slashed tape back across the cracked casing and labeled the files. Commander Hayes called for an immediate redaction order over the secure channel. Seal the site. No one goes back in. We quarantine hand files up through official channels. His voice carried the authority of an institution faced with an unknown liability. He moved to lock the evidence tent and assigned perimeter watches. Mara argued for one more run. Trace the last pinging sensor, capture its raw feed, and bring back anything that might show a source. Hayes refused. The decision split the team again. Lila's disappearance made the choice unsimple. Raymond vouched for restraint while Mara pushed for trace. The argument produced the rapid give, and take the notes later recorded as a command clash. Commander, if we don't trace the feed now, we'll lose any lead we can get. Mara, you are jeopardizing lives by advancing unscorted. Hayes, I'll go alone if I must. Mara replied, you will not. End of discussion. The firefight ended with a compromise. Mara would advance only to the perimeter's nearest last ping, not beyond. She readied again and found herself moving in a single file line with Raymond and a junior technician who volunteered without looking for permission. The underbrush pressed at their knees. Fog clung to the ground in curtains. They crossed the mapped boundary. Mara checked each waypoint by touch against the piece. As they advanced, Mara heard the pronouncement of her name as if from inches behind her ear. The radio collapsed and the light from her headlamp seemed to thin. She turned slowly. Their arm's length of fog showed a pale motion and then nothing. Lila's voice called brisk and ordinary. Mara, over here. The tone matched the Lila Mara knew. The timing did not. Mara stepped toward the sound. The gravel underfoot made no imprint of anything leaving. Her breath came quick and precise. She had a hand on the recorder and the other on the guppus. Then the fog moved wrong. A white shape slid between trunks and Lila was not beside her. Mara heard Raymond shout. The world narrowed into a cadence of action. Radio drops, mechanical clicks, a scream swallowed by undergrowth. She ran. Her boot caught a root and she pitched toward a low bank. When she righted herself, Raymond was gone from sight and the last ping on the handheld had cut to a thin line. Mara shouted Lila's name until her voice broke. She found Raymond staggered in the clearing, hands trembling, face pale as paper. He had a recorder in a fist. The casing was cracked, the microphone grill dented. His speech came as stabs. They were saying my name together. Raymond, we heard Leela. Then the feed spliced itself. The radio started repeating names on loop. He held up the device, and the playback leaked overlapping syllables that made Mara's teeth ache. Mara realized the playbook had changed. This was not an intruder who hid and ran. Whatever it was could restructure their sounds, mimic tones, and implant those tones into their network. The team moved into containment protocol with new urgency. They boxed the damaged devices. They redacted the files with heavy black bars. Hayes ordered a withdrawal and immediate seal. Back at the evidence tent, they assembled a redacted log. The log documented the sensor readings, the retrieval, and the damaged communications gear. It also contained a note from Mara, an itemized list of anomalies, and a request to reopen the perimeter if any sensor continued to ping. In the recordings, the last active sensor sat half a mile beyond the sealed line, and its last output was one clear, low whisper. Mara listened to that final file alone in the dim tent light. The whisper did not carry metaphor, it carried intent. It did not promise safety. It did not offer explanation. It placed a sound, a syllable in her name, and left the sentence unfinished. She closed the recorder and wrote a short line on the incident sheet. Then she placed the recorder in the sealed evidence box. Commander Hayes signed the top of the folder and the seal clicked shut. The redaction stamp smudged the margins. Raymond fetched coffee with hands that did not quite steady. Lila's rucksack remained behind, zipped and untouched. The last action of the chapter was small and concrete. The last functioning sensor in the network pinged its heartbeat and produced one raw packet that slipped out of the secure queue. The packet contained a single audio clip, a whispered name and a faint pattern of breaths. The field net logged the ping, flagged the anomaly, and then the server closed the file under command directive. The sensor continued to tick, patient and uncompromised. It awaited the next retrieval team. Mara watched the sealed box and felt the suspicion that had driven her at dawn settle into a different shape, a guarded certainty that whatever they had traced was not bound by maps or hours. She handed the sealed folder to Hayes and said nothing more. The final sound she kept in her head was not a metaphor, it was a recording detail. A low harmonica, the name, an extra breath that aligned with no human lung cycle. The chapter ends with an immediate, concrete beat. Mara keys the secure channel and sends one terse instruction to the archive: reopen the ping if the sensor reports again. Then pockets the recorder label marked Chainer and walks out into the perimeter. Dawn, the sealed tent behind her, and the last sensor still half a mile inside the boundary, still emitting a faint patient call. A speaker on the rusted tripod cut through Dawn like a command. Nor, then Alvarez, then Dre. Mara Ellison. Mara moved before she had decided to move. She reached for her headlamp, suspicion tightening at the base of her skull, and ran toward the clearing. The call repeated, layered and mechanical, as if 3 different feeds had been forced into one output. The problem was immediate and precise. Something in the forest was using names from their roster and broadcasting them toward camp. That fact made Mara act. She had been awake the way people stay awake when paperwork must be finished. Deliberate, counting steps, she clipped the keys to her jacket and yanked the tent flap open. The dawn air hit her face with damp pine and power line ozone. In the command tent, Carter was already keyed into the spectrogram rig. Alvarez had the playback cued on his recorder. Their movements showed worry in short, measured gestures. The suspicion in Mara's chest did more than soar her thoughts. It set the mission: trace the source, assess contamination, protect the team. At my name, Nor, from the far side of the table. Nor's voice was small and even, not shaking. She kept her hands folded like she could hold herself in place. It mine too. Alvarez, tapping the recorder, not a playback. Not an echo. Mara, play it again. She stood with her hands full of gear and waited while Carter slid the playback up on the display. The spectrogram lit in thin violet bars. Underlay patterns blinked like code. The recorded waveform showed overlapping voices. Carter frowned. It's not a straight copy. It's stitched personnel file samples, old past recordings, and live might bleed. Whatever made this had access to our database. He kept his words flat and institutional, but the word access made Alvarez look up sharply. Of our remote pulls, who'd be hitting our servers out here. He leaned over the terminal, fingers moving fast. Mara checked the logs. Now her voice had the short, controlled punctuation of orders issued with more worry than she let show. They found unauthorized queries time-stamped to the same minutes the calls had played. The logs showed requests for names and last known coordinates. The pattern was surgical. Personnel metadata pulled, sensor telemetry requested. Then the cluster went live with the stitched audio. The discovery changed suspicion into a new feeling: cold alarm. Mara felt as a tightening at the jaw, an urge to close the tent flap and lock the data down herself. Carter, who's got clearance to run that script? Mara. Carter answered, only central ops. But look, there are odd handoffs, remote node hits from unknown IPs. They were relaying from the cluster. He tapped the screen. They didn't just call us. They knew where we were when they did it. Mara's hands found the field map and ran over their grid marks. The cluster lay 10 minutes by foot from camp, a ring of sensors on rusted tripods around a narrow clearing. The calls had come from that ring. Alvarez, we should retrieve them. We document, we don't disturb. He at the way a technician says protocol, the word steady, the implication urgent. Nor stood and said, I'll go with her. She Mara's name when she volunteered. Mara felt another motion in her self-protectiveness, less reason than the orders she wrote in binders. It changed suspicion into immediate resolve to keep the team together. She looked at Alvarez. Alvarez, you'll stay on the terminal and keep the logs streaming. Carter, keep comms open to Central and tell them we were making a retrieval. Nor and I will trace on foot. She paused, and the tent filled with the sound of breath. Move with me on the path markers. If anything feels wrong, we abort. Understood, Alvarez, understood. Document everything. His voice hitched once when he swallowed. They moved out with headlamps cutting cones in the trees. The forest underfoot was spongy with last night's rain, roots snagged bootlaces. Mara walked and catalogued in short notes. The tripod nearest the path had its microphone housing cut and taped to a branch. A strip of adhesive label with the letters NOR was affixed to a sapling. She touched the tape with a gloved finger. It was damp and smelled like metal and old plastic. That smell anchored her nerves into concrete observation and burned the abstract into specifics. At the clearing, the sensors were all oriented toward camp. Each tripod was angled with surgical intent. One housing had their field chatter spliced and taped to it. A strip of recorder tape with Nor's laugh, Alvarez's comment about a weather sweep, Mara's name clipped from yesterday's roll call. The site was a decision point. Whoever had done this came into the physical world and rearranged it to send a message. Nor crouched and touched the tape. She straightened slowly and said, "It sounds like me when I sleep." Warn, her hands trembled. It sounded like my voice asking me to come home. Mara, you didn't walk past the boundary last night, did you? Her question was simple, direct. Nor shook her head once. Nor, what did you hear exactly? Nor, a soft invite. A tone like my mother's voice telling me the oven's on. It come say goodbye. It used my pause and the way I say my own name. It used names from the database. It knew me. Her words were clipped. She blinked hard and the headlamp caught the damp plate of her cheek. Mara tightened the strap on her pack. The emotion shift from suspicion to fear completed in her hands, the way she gripped her recorder, the way she spoke faster with shorter sentences. We take samples. We leave markers. Nor walk the perimeter with me and show me the changes in the undergrowth. Do not follow any sounds. Do not answer when a device says your name. She looked at Alvarez and Carter through the comms scope. We trace inward. We keep mapping. The plan pushed the group's tension forward into action. They found a narrow deer path pushed in the trees, leaves crushed into a line of darker soil. At the path entrance, someone had hung a crudely made marker, a length of cloth with metal clips, and attached was a small player whirring with Nor's voice on repeat. The player clicked on each time leaves shifted. Mara turned it off with her thumb and clipped it into evidence wrap. She bent toward the soil and traced a shoe print. Size and tread matched Nor's training boot. The print then continued a single step and disappeared into clambered moss. Nor, that can't be right. She went pale, her voice narrowed. I never went past this, Mara. Then someone lured you, or something lured you using you. Which is worse, her words were not rhetorical. They were an operational question with moral teeth. Emotion tightened again, doubt sliding into the sharpness of responsibility. She saw herself as the person who should have prevented this because she had written the safety briefs. That sense moved her to order the search. They followed the disrupted brush in lines, calling Nor's name at intervals with radios rather than trusting any stationary speaker. The forest answered with twigs snapping and no one answering. At 900 meters, they found only a handheld recorder on a low branch, its battery drained but still playing Nor's name in a loop when touched. The recorder had been placed inside a coil of barbed wire, not to trap a person but to pin sound to an object. The tangible cruelty of that action shifted fear into a cold, clinical anger in Mara, an anger she kept in her jaw so the team could rely on the protocol. Alvarez, this is tampering. Someone with hands did this. He spoke fast. These repositionings can't be wind. These are deliberate. Carter's reply came through the radio, clipped. We pulled more logs. Remote accesses correspond to your path times. There's a relay you don't have on site, some device using your telemetry to generate the calls. It's not just mimicry. It's target exploitation of our records. He listed file names and timestamps in short phrases. His tone was official and flat enough to be a tool. The data told them the forest had been weaponized against them using institutional data. Mara felt a new motion inside her. Responsibility into guilt, then into a sharpened decision. We stop using comms except for direct field reports. Alvarez set the terminal to sterile raid only in flush caches. Carter, push a redacted addendum to Central. Fields are tampering, unauthorized metadata pulls, potential exploitation vector. Put everything on time lock. Nor, stay with me. Do not step into the trees alone. Her instructions kept the team together and moved them toward containment. An hour later, the device at the center of the clearing began to speak in Nor's voice, softer than a live feed and perfectly matched. The recording said, Nor, come see, it's just past the branches. Nor's face changed at the sound. She took 2 steps toward the tree line and then stopped. Her hand lifted toward the call. Mara, Nor, don't move closer. Her voice broke on the last syllable. Nor turned her head to Mara with a look that mixed recognition and a strange blank openness. Nor whispered at me. My mother's kitchen light rattled. It sounded like my mother calling me from another house. Her fingers were cold. I should go and not be afraid. Mara moved faster than thought. She grabbed Nor's wrist. Alvarez, hold the perimeter. Carter, I need a remote log snapshot now. The scene compressed into a white zone of action. Mara's fingers on Nor's wrist, the recorder in her other hand, the forest breathing around them. Then Nor's boots slid through leaf litter and she was gone. No sound described the disappearance. There was a space where a body should have been and only a sudden absence of twig, snap cadence. Mare froze, then ran to the edge of the path and peered into thick saplings. There was no bobbing movement, no sign of a struggle beyond crushed ferns. Nor had taken 2 steps and then the trail ended in clean, unbroken moss. Mara called Nor's name until her voice stung. Alvarez found the recorder from Nor's pocket on the ground 20 meters back, its small lead blinking in a puddle of mud. When he picked it up, it sang Nor's name 2 times and then went silent. He dropped it into his palm like it burned. It played Nor, then stopped. He said, "Each word a separate impact. There are no footprints after the gap." Nothing. They organized a grid search. Teams moved out in pairs, radios terse and clipped, calling Nor's name and marking areas with flagging tape. The search turned methodical, an attempt to impose human geometry on a place that had not honored it. Mara counted steps and coordinates and measured time. Each recorded item turned her attention into action. The only thing she trusted now was the checklist of retrieval, the intake forms, the chain of custody labels. She catalogued the fallen recorder, the angled sensors, the tape on the tree. The facts kept her from dissolving into an unfocused panic. Hours later, when sunlight thinned into a pallid afternoon, Alvarez found the single clear clue. A line of crushed stems that led to a stand of saplings and stopped at a sapling where a small camera had been shoved deep into the bark. The camera was not theirs. It had a civilian sticker and a dead battery. Its lens was clouded with resin. When Alvarez pried it free, a strip of adhesive label fell loose. Alvarez in block letters, he swore softly, a single harsh syllable. Carter radioed in with a discovery. "We've got remote access traces tied to a public cloud relay. The relay forwarded personnel data to a third-party node. I filed a kill switch, but the requests are coming from a rotating set of endpoints. The implication landed like a physical object. This had been engineered to look natural, but it used their infrastructure. The twist altered their understanding. This was not a lone animal or a localized anomaly. It was a campaign targeting their unit." Mara felt the next emotion shift from fear into grim strategy. She closed a hand over the recorder and said, "We are not bait. We are not assets to manipulate. We pack one device as evidence and one device as countermeasure. Alvarez prepped decoy broadcasts and my voice on a continuous loop in the outer ring. If something responds, we pull the team back and burn the relay. Carter, get legal on the line. I will draft a redacted field addendum to forward to Central. We either contain this or we hand it up the chain and they handle it. Do you copy?" Alvarez and Carter answered with short confirmations. Nor did not answer. Nor's radio was still in the tent where they had left it on silent. The absence of Nor's voice became a new fact to act on. That evening, as they prepped the decoys, Mara wrote the addendum with her hands on a waterproof clipboard. She wrote in clipped clauses: "Sensor tampering, unauthorized metadata pulls, mimicry vector field retrieval made, personnel missing, evidence sealed." She blacked out names where she had to, but she recorded the specifics that could be verified. Timestamps, GPS coordinates, serial numbers. The act of writing steadied her. It turned her worry into a legal sequence of actions. When Carter for more detail, Mara slid the clipboard across and said, "Add the relay nodes and the camera stickers, note the adhesive labels, note the recorder loop." But to keep it factual, her tone was thin and exact. At dusk, Alvarez set up the decoy. He recorded 5 minutes of Mara's voice, her name, her procedural call signs, a looped instruction placed at intervals, and then distributed the playback units around the perimeter. They were to sound like a field team working the edge. The plan was to lure whatever had been targeting them away from any interior movement. It was a bait, and if the field notes were honest, a calculated risk. Mara watched Alvarez mount one player on a tree. "If it answers, we pull and burn the array." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Night fell and the decoys began to speak in low loops. The camp sat in a tight ring of lamplight and breath. They listened on headsets and watched the spectrogram, needle traces and a chorus of faint peaks. Twice a playback answered the decoy, with someone using a voice like Nor's to invite a response. Each time the sound was layered and wrong in small ways. A gap where a consonant should be, an extra breath before a name. Each time Alvarez flinched and tightened the remote kill. Each time Mara forced her breathing into even counts. In those pauses, her emotions shifted again, strategy into awareness, resolve into a tired acceptance that the next move needed to be precise. At 3 in the morning, their radios fed a new log. A remote node had attempted a data pull using the camp zone uplink. Carter's fingers moved on the keyboard. "It's coming from an external relay helmeted through a public cloud. I'm tracing hops, but it's not a single attacker. It's a set of nodes acting like an algorithm. Someone built this to use our records against us." His voice had the flat edge of someone reading bad data. Mara felt the last motion she let herself feel that night. Responsibility folded into the act of containment. She wrote a final line on the addendum and then sealed the file in the evidence crate. She keyed the crate shut with a field padlock and handed the key to Alvarez. "You take it to the vehicle. You leave it sealed until Central collects it. Do not open it again." Her instruction was an action to enact the containment she could not otherwise force on the forest. They returned to the tent and found Nor there, sitting on the cot with knees drawn up and a thin blanket over her shoulders. She looked at them with eyes that did not track to anything in the room. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like she was trying to remember how to form a word. The room smelled of damp wool and the lemon cleaner they'd used to disinfect the console. Noor's hands were dirty and small cuts speckled her knuckles. Noor, Mara. She sat opposite and kept her voice flat. Where did you go? The question was a tool. It demanded a specific answer. Noor, I walked and then I walked, and a voice said, this is home. I followed it. I stepped through some trees and a warm light rolled like a hand across my face, and then I was at the clearing. Her words came in pieces. I remember the sensor players. I remember the tape. I remember the smell of pine and a cooking smell. Then I don't remember for a while. I woke up at the path. I can't say for how long. She looked at Mara. They were placing cameras. She the last, as if recalling a photograph. Alvarez stood and said, we found a camera with your name on it. Nor we found a recorder looped. There were no tracks afterward. The sensors were turned to point at the camp. Someone set a lure. Someone wants us to come, Carter added. Remote pulls included your personnel file. Nor. They used your voice samples from training logs and stitched them into invites. This was engineered. It wasn't random. Mara watched Noor's hands. They shook twice and then held still. The suspicion that had begun the day had run like a thread through every action, through the search, the evidence catalog, the decoys, the logs. It had changed shape in her chest, suspicion to fear, fear to anger, anger to a precise responsibility. Seeing Noor alive and unable to explain the hours she had lost closed a loop but did not remove the facts that demanded containment. They drafted the final field addendum and Mara signed with a single black stroke that sealed their chain of custody. She placed a redaction bar where the document would later be redacted by Central. A line for the public version to show sensor tampering and a line for the classified addendum to show exploitation of personnel metadata. The document moved from her pad into the evidence crate with the same plainness as a bandage. It was a physical act. The crate closed. The lock clicked. A label was attached that read in block letters, classified, field evidence. Before dawn they loaded the crate onto the field vehicle. Carter used a secure SAT-link to notify Central Operations of the retrieval and requested immediate pickup. The SAT-link returned a terse directive. Central would send an extraction team and legal counsel. Until then, maintain quarantine and a watch. Mara repeated the instruction out loud and then turned and looked at Noor. Noor, I remember one thing clearly. It my name like someone behind me and then told me to walk toward a pale tree. It wasn't anyone I knew, but it used a voice like a family member's. That was the worst part. It learned how to be trusted. She put a hand to her temple the way people press on a bruise. Mara's response was not a philosophical line. She set her jaw, checked the padlock on the crate twice, and then tapped a line into the terminal decision. Bait perimeter with decoy broadcasts. Withdraw non-essential personnel to staging, contain evidence, forward classified addendum. Each step was a deliberate action. Her voice when she spoke to Alvarez and Carter was controlled and dry. In the final hours before the extraction crew arrived, Central sent a clearance code and a small team in a dark SUV. 2 agents took custody of the crate after inspecting the logs. They wore institutional jackets and carried their own sealed cases. One of them, a woman with a cropped haircut and a navy parka, slid a red stamp across the crate and said, we will handle transfer. Field team will hand over data, no public release. She looked at Mara for a long second, then added, keep this quiet. For everyone's safety. Her tone implied both instruction and warning. Mara nodded and signed the custody forms. She handed over the evidence and the remaining decoy players. The agents packed them into a padded case and loaded them into the vehicle. The woman in the navy parka said, we will audit the relay nodes and bring in cyber containment. For now, you 3 will write consolidated witness statements and undergo debrief. You will not speak of internal details outside this team. The commands were precise, like the sound of a relay snapping into place. Before they left, Perez handed Mara a tiny playback unit he had kept wrapped in a clean maintenance cloth. We kept one for the record. For you. His voice was low and immediate. Mara put the unit in her pocket. She did not ask for it to be restarted. She did not want to hear its small loop again. Nor meanwhile sat very still and watched the agents load the crate. Her hands were clasped around the blanket. The woman's eyes tightened when Nor quietly, will they find who did this? Her voice dropped the question into the air like a pebble. The agent in the navy parka did not answer immediately. She closed the field log and then said, we will try, but this might be a process measured in months. For now you evacuate and we take custody. Your team did what they could. That matters. The reply was practical, not comforting. When the SUV left with the crate, the camp felt smaller. The decoy players sat dark. The spectrogram screen was blank and the forest made the same sounds it had made before a name was spoken into it. But those sounds were now loaded with evidence and procedure. Mara pulled the tiny playback unit from her pocket and felt its weight. She walked to the edge of the clearing and set the recorder on a flat stone. She pressed play only long enough to hear her own voice say, Mara Ellison, perimeter check, and then she cut it off. She left the device on the stone wrapped in duct tape and a note with the local coordinates for Central. She walked back to the tent with Noor between her and Alvarez. The ride back to base would be 2 days of reports, interviews, and a sealed chain of custody. Noor's face had a set that said she would answer questions, but that some answers were not yet available. In the cab of the vehicle, Mara wrote one last line into the clipboard, an operational addendum that she initialed and then blacked out for the record. If entrusted central evidence contradicts field log initiate recall protocol, she slid the note into the crate labels folder before handing the clipboard to Carter to file. At the staging area before the convoy left, Noor turned to Mara and said, "Why did you come after me?" Mara met her eyes. She could have answered with the institutional language about containment and protocol, but she didn't. Because you are on my team. Because I collect names and files, and when one of them goes missing, I go look for that person until someone else stops me. Her voice was plain. It was close to a confession. Noor's shoulders sagged a fraction. "I heard it call my name like someone at the kitchen door." She said, "It knows how to be patient." Mara closed her hand around the decoy unit in her pocket and felt the hard plastic. "Then we make it costly to be patient. We make the forest work to find what it wants." Her sentence was not triumphant. It was a plan issued in an exhausted voice. It was the endpoint of a day that had started with a rusted speaker calling names and moved through evidence and decisions into a sealed crate and a formal transfer of responsibility. They left the site with Noor alive and fragile, with evidence sealed and a chain of custody in hand, and with Central Operations now responsible for the deeper investigation. The field decision to set decoy broadcasts and then hand custody over had resolved the immediate conflict. The team had recovered Noor, documented the exploitation of personal data, and transferred the physical evidence to authorities who could escalate containment. The emotional threads that began with suspicion finished in action. Mara moved through the shifts from suspicion to alarm to strategy and finally to a tired, procedural closure. At the staging area, while vehicles idled and agents checked manifests, Mara placed the small playback unit into the evidence envelope she had kept. She wrote a note on the outside: "Field, retain 1 copy for Team Archive. Do not publicize." She sealed it and handed it to Alvarez with a single look. "Keep it secure." Alvarez nodded and tucked it into his vest. The final paragraph of the field addendum that Mara submitted read in plain block lines: "Personnel recall. Noor returned to camp at 18 hours. No physical trauma observable. Subject displays episodic memory gap. Devices found oriented deliberately toward camp. Evidence package turned over to Central Operations at 23:15 hours. Immediate containment recommended. Decoy broadcast deployed and will be monitored by field team until pickup." She signed with a full name and a timestamp, and then, because a field leader must act on the concrete, she walked back to the stone where she had left the decoy briefly and picked up her headlamp. She clipped it to her jacket and walked to the staging vehicle with Noor and Alvarez beside her. The engine's rumble swallowed small sounds. They did not leave thinking the matter closed as a story. They left with documents sealed, a crate in the hands of agents, Noor alive to answer questions, and a promise that the next steps would be taken by an institution larger than their unit. The containment decision had been made, the immediate vanishing had been resolved to the extent a field team could resolve it, and the forest, whatever had learned to call names, would have to face a different chain of custody now. Mara sat in the vehicle and felt the clipboard on her lap like a ballast. She had done what she could, recorded facts, protected personnel, and passed the evidence up the line. That was both the end of her authority in the field and the concrete closure she could give Noor and Alvarez. Outside the vehicle window, the trees slid past in black columns. Noor curled a blanket tighter and whispered once, as if reading from a list she could not see, "Don't answer when it calls." Mara nodded and shut her eyes for a breath, counting off the minutes in even numbers until the convoy started. The last concrete act of the chapter was the crate door closing in the agent's hands and a stamped receipt given to Mara. Evidence transferred, chain of custody intact. She left the site with a signed paper and a sealed box, and that was the decisive, physical end to the retrieval and the disappearance that had begun with a rusted speaker calling their names.